On the 2nd of April 2002, nearly after the fast was over, a sign appeared to both of us, which explained the sequence of the events. All that Yeshua had explained to us throughout the whole fast was explained to us through symbols, which explain the scriptures. But at the end of the fast, Yeshua, in His mercy and grace, showed us a chronological line of symbols explaining how these things will take place. And we will give much attention when we look at the seminar, the sequence of the events. But on that day, one of those symbols that we saw was a minesweeper that appeared in the sky, standing right next to a handbrake that was pulled up high into the sky. The question is, what was Yeshua revealing to us? On that day when we saw the handbrake, we called it a ceasefire. But it took nearly 9 years to understand the fullness of this specific symbol, and at the right time, Yeshua, when time had reached its fulfillment, Yeshua revealed to us what this sign actually meant, interpreting the understanding of prophecy like we have never seen it before. After the sign appeared to us, we saw another sign of a large handbrake that appeared in the heavens. So what we basically see is we see a minesweeper standing right next to a handbrake that is pulled up high into the sky. And these two symbols together, Yeshua is giving us an indication of a very important prophetic event that was about to take place. It must also be kept in mind that we saw these symbols and signs in the heavens already in the year 2002. But only 7 years later, Yahweh, in His mercy, revealed the understanding of what these things meant. If we just break them up little by little, we will start to see exactly what this sign meant. We did understand at that time that the handbrake meant some kind of a ceasefire, but we did not fully understand exactly what this ceasefire was and when it would take place. According to Daniel, there is a prophecy that says, "And he shall enter into a strong and a firm covenant with many for 1 week or 7 years. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and offering to cease for the remaining of the 3 and 1.5 years. And upon the wing or the pinnacle of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the full determined end is poured out on the desolator." We see that Daniel prophesied about a certain prophetic period that would come when the Prince of the Covenant would make an agreement with many for 7 years. And we understood that this sign actually was an indication of the beginning of the 7-year peace treaty that would happen according to Daniel. But exactly what it meant, we did not know at that time. But now we will reveal to you what Yahweh, 7 years later, revealed. What is the 7-year covenant? Who made the 7-year covenant? And when did the 7-year covenant start? While Yeshua spoke to me in 2007, He revealed through a dream what the timing was for that which He had called us for, and that the time of the beginning of those things that He had prophesied through all the prophets was about to take place. In January 2010, discovering that there's going to be a solar eclipse on the 15th of January 2010, I went outside to take some pictures of this eclipse, which was only a 10% eclipse in South Africa. As I walked past the television coming back in from outside, on the news there was an announcement that was made by the nuclear scientists of the world. And this was the announcement that I found. It's called a doomsday clock. And it's called, it is 6 minutes to midnight, which the nuclear scientists made on the 14th of January 2010, saying, "We are poised to bend the arc of history towards a world free of nuclear weapons. For the first time since atomic bombs were dropped in 1945, leaders of nuclear weapon states are cooperating to vastly reduce their arsenals and secure all nuclear bomb-making material. And for the first time ever, industrialized and developing countries alike are pledging to limit climate-changing gas emissions that could render our planet nearly uninhabitable." We see that the nuclear scientists of the world made an announcement saying that all those nuclear states of the world, which we'll now look at in a moment, they will all reduce their nuclear bombs, and they will search their arsenals, and they will secure all nuclear bomb-making material. As soon as I walked past the television and I heard these nuclear scientists say this, the Holy Spirit came upon me, and the word of the Lord spoke to me, saying, "When they say, 'Peace, peace,' where there is no peace, sudden destruction will come upon them." This was according to the word of Paul that he prophesied to the Thessalonians, saying in chapter 5, verse 3, "When people are saying all is well and secure, and there is peace and safety, then in a moment unforeseen destruction, ruin, and death will come upon them as suddenly as labor pains come upon a woman with child. And they will by no means escape, for there will be no escape. But you are not given up to the power of darkness, brethren, for that day to overtake you by surprise like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of the day. We do not belong either to the night or to darkness. Accordingly then, let us not sleep as the rest do, but let us keep wide awake, alert, watchful, cautious, and on our guard, and let us be sober, calm, collected, and circumspect." So Yeshua reveals that when the world is saying peace, peace, then suddenly unforeseen destruction that they did not foresee will suddenly come upon them as labor pains come upon a woman. And we will also see how this very scripture explains the very times and seasons of Yahweh in the next seminar when we look at the calendar or the Lord's calendar. But what is the doomsday clock? In 1947, during the Cold War, there was a clock that was started at 7 minutes to midnight and was subsequently advanced or rewounded per the state of the world and nuclear war prospects. Setting the clock is relatively arbitrary and decided by the directors of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, reflecting global affairs. The clock has not always been set and reset as quickly as events occur. The closest nuclear war threat was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and it reached crisis or climax and resolution before it could be set to reflect that possible doomsday. From the graph in front of us, we can see that from 1947 there was a imaginary clock that was created by the nuclear scientists of the world. giving an indication of what the possibilities were for, depending on the state of the world, for a nuclear war to take place. We see that the prospects shot up in 1962, as we have seen with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and again in 1972, closing the Yom Kippur War. But we see also in 1991 there was a dramatic increase and a great possibility of nuclear war. But we see that in 2010, according to nuclear scientists, they have turned back this clock, meaning that the possibility for human beings to destroy themselves are actually decreasing. The nuclear scientists of the world on that day said the following about the doomsday clock and the possibility of mankind destroying itself. It says, these unprecedented steps are signs of growing political will to tackle the two gravest threats of civilization, the terror of nuclear weapons and runaway climate change. This hopeful state of world affairs leads the boards of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which include 19 Nobel laureates, to move the minute hand of the doomsday clock back from 5 to 6 minutes to midnight. By shifting the hand back from midnight by only one additional minute, we emphasize how much needs to be accomplished, while at the same time recognizing the signs of collaboration among the United States, Russia, the European Union, India, China, and Brazil and others on nuclear security and on climate stabilization. So we see that because of something that had happened in the world, the nuclear scientists of the world have concluded that the possibility for a nuclear threat and for a runaway climate changes to bring the world to an end, but especially nuclear threats, they have turned back the clock because of a collaboration among nations like the United States and Russia, the European Union and India, China and Brazil, and many other nations, as we will see in the rest of the seminar. The biggest reason why the nuclear scientists of the world had turned back the doomsday clock was because of a NPT, which is a treaty on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. So a non-proliferation treaty on nuclear weapons is also called a non-proliferation treaty, or a NPT. Is a treaty to limit the spread and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Opened for signature on July the 1st, 1968. There are currently 189 countries parting to the treaty, 5 of which have nuclear weapons: the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and China. They are also called the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Only 4 recognized sovereign states are not parties of this treaty: India, Israel, Pakistan, and North Korea. India, Pakistan, and North Korea have openly tested and declared that they possess nuclear weapons. Israel has a policy of opacity regarding its own nuclear weapons program, which means they have decided not to take part in it at all, or not to be involved. North Korea acceded the treaty and violated it and withdrew from it in 2003. So we see that the NPT treaty has been a treaty that has been made since 1968 and was initiated at that time by United States of America in order to stop the manufacture of nuclear weapons. We see that many of the nations of the world actually 189 countries are actually part of this non-proliferation treaty. We see that there is a few nations which are considered as problematic nations, or as Bush once called them, rogue nations, which are a danger and a threat because of their manufacturing of nuclear weapons. These nations include India, Israel, Pakistan, and North Korea. It's very interesting to see that Israel is also included as a nation that has not partaken in the non-proliferation treaty, but that does not make them any less of a threat to the rest of the world or to a nuclear war. We see that Pakistan, North Korea, and India, and we now know that even Iran is in a race for the manufacture of a weapon of mass destruction. If we look at the distribution of the countries that are part of the non-proliferation treaty, or the nuclear proliferation treaty, we will see that the countries that have signed and ratified the treaty are most of the countries in the world. The only countries that are not the next level of being taken part of the Profilation Treaty is those who acceded or succeeded in the Profilation Treaty. It means those nations had some nuclear weapons before. We know that South Africa at a stage had 4 nuclear bombs manufactured, but because of the Profilation Treaty, they have stopped manufacturing it. As a matter of fact, they have given it up, and that they are no longer manufacturing nuclear weapons. These nations have acceded or succeeded as a nation. The next level of nation that we know, which is yellow in this on this map, we can see are those nations which is a state abiding by the treaty, which is Taiwan. Taiwan is actually abiding by the treaty, meaning that they have the danger of manufacturing of nuclear weapons, but they abide by the treaty. Then we see that there are also those nations who have withdrawn. North Korea has withdrawn itself and have actually broken the treaty and the agreements of the treaty. And then we see there are those who have not at all signed the treaty, which is India, Israel, and Pakistan, being major contributors to not taking part in the treaty. When we look at this map in front of us, it becomes very clear where the problematic areas in the world are. We see that in the east we have North Korea and India and Pakistan, a great problem to the rest of the world. So all the world is called to be part of this treaty so that there would not be a nuclear war in the world. On the 8th of April 2010, the US and Russia signed a renewed treaty that would reduce nuclear weapons over the next 7 years by 50%. The US and Russia together account for 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And under this new agreement, which would cut by roughly a third of the number of nuclear weapons of each country will be limited to 1,550 deployed warheads, 800 deployed and non-deployed intercontinental ballistic missile launchers, submarines launched ballistic missile launchers, and heavy bombers equipped for nuclear armament, and 700 for deployed ICBMs and SLBMs, and heavy bombers equipped for nuclear armaments. The world says that today is an important milestone for nuclear security and non-proliferation. As for US and Russia's relations, Obama said, after signing the treaty at the same 9th century castle where he spoke last year. The president, who has acknowledged that the goal of a nuclear-free world might not be achieved in his lifetime, still hailed the agreement as a way to begin to leave the Cold War behind and to address new challenges in a new way. While the New START Treaty is an important step forward, it is just one step on a longer journey, he said. As I said last year in Prague, this treaty will set the stage for further cuts, and going forward, we hope to pursue discussions with Russia on reducing both our strategic and tactical weapons, including non-deployed weapons. In short, Obama got together with Russia and they signed a renewed treaty called a New START Treaty, which within the next 7 years aimed to reduce their nuclear weapons and to completely stop manufacturing any nuclear weapons. And we've seen the amounts with which they want to reduce it by. 5 days later, during a United Nations Security Council meeting in Washington, D.C., President Obama got together with 47 nations of the world, and there was a strong agreement that was made between these nations to stop the manufacture of nuclear weapons and to reduce them by 50% in the next 4 years. The treaty commits these nations to slash the number of strategic nuclear weapons by 1/3 and more than half the number of missiles, submarines and bombers carrying them. Reaching anew for peace, President Barack Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev on Thursday signed a treaty to shrink the nation's nuclear arsenals, the biggest such pact between the former Cold War foes in a generation. The new treaty will shrink the limit of nuclear warheads to 1,550 per country over 7 years. That still allows for a mutual destruction several times over, but it is intended to send a strong signal that Russia and the US, which between them own more than 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, are serious about disarmament. So we see that President Obama got together with 47 nations of the world to make an agreement to search for all the nuclear material in the world and to reduce it, and to stop the manufacture of nuclear weapons, and to reduce the existing nuclear weapons by 50% in the next 4 years. So we see that a very important agreement was made on the 13th of April 2010 with many nations, with President Obama specifically leading the United Nations Security Council for the first time that the United Nations were actually part of the United Nations Security Council. But the question is, who is the United Nations Security Council? When we look at a map of the nuclear nations of the world, we will see that there are also different levels of participation as nuclear nations. The first level, the most evident level, is those nations that actually have nuclear weapons. We see that the United States and Russia and France and the United Kingdom and China all have nuclear weapons. Then we see those nations that are actually abstaining countries which abstain from having any nuclear weapons, which is Australia and Canada. Then we see those nations that are high-risk states, that they are actually danger and they could have manufactured nuclear weapons without anyone knowing about it. We see the map quickly. We will see that the DRC, that Egypt, Algeria, Brazil, and many parts of South America, parts of Mexico, parts of Indonesia, according to this map, and even parts of Iran and Iraq, and those areas are considered as high-risk states. Then we see recent renunciations. We see that there were nations that had some nuclear weapons, but they renounced them. And we have seen earlier that South Africa and other nations bordering the USSR, the old, now the National Federation of Russia, have aborted their manufacturing of nuclear weapons completely. Then we see that there are those nations who are non-NPT nuclear nation states, as we have seen earlier, and they are not part of the nuclear nations at all, having India as one of those nations, with North Korea, and all these nations actually on a certain level as nuclear nations. But what is the purpose of the United Nations Security Council, and who do they exist out of? As we have seen, that there are nuclear states as well as non-nuclear states. It says 5 states are recognized by the NPT as nuclear weapon states. China, which signed in 1992, France also in 1992, the Soviet Union in 1968, obligations and rights now assumed by the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom in 1968, and the United States also in 1968. The US, UK, and the Soviet Union were the only states openly possessing such weapons among the original ratifiers of the treaty, which entered in force in 1970. These 5 nations, also the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. We see that the nuclear states of the world, basically the 5 most powerful states in the world having nuclear weapons, are also called the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. These 5 nuclear weapon states have made undertakings not to use their nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon state party, except in response to a nuclear attack or a conventional attack in alliance with a nuclear weapon state. However, these undertakings have not been incorporated formally into the treaty, and the exact details have varied over time. The US also had nuclear warheads targeted at North Korea and non-weapon states from 1959 until 1991. We see that there is another little clause that they say are actually not included in the non-Profilation Treaty, which says that they are not allowed to attack a non-nuclear weapon state. But we also see that if this non-nuclear weapon state worked with another nuclear weapon state, there was a possibility and there was a window open for those nuclear states to actually attack this non-nuclear state. We also see that North Korea have had said that they have nuclear weapons and they have been targeted, and the world has been making themselves ready in case they do make use of nuclear weapons. Non-abiding states. Countries that have signed the treaty as non-nuclear weapon states and maintained that status have an unbroken record of not building nuclear weapons. However, Iraq has cited by the IAEA and sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council for violating its NPT safeguard obligations. North Korea never came into compliance with its NPT safeguard agreement and was cited repeatedly for these violations. They later withdrew from the NPT and tested multiple nuclear devices. Iran was found in non-compliance with its NPT safeguard obligations in an unusual non-consensus decision because it failed in a number of instances over an extended period of time to report aspects of its enrichment program. And Libya pursued a Candleline nuclear weapons program before abandoning it in December 2003. In 1991, Romania reported previously undeclared nuclear activities by the former regime, and the IAEA reported this non-compliance to the Security Council for information only. So we see that basically 3 nations have been a great threat and have been called as non-abiding states. They have not abided according to the rules of the NPT. That is Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. Libya, although it had a Candleline nuclear weapons program, abandoned it in December 2003. But who knows? Maybe they didn't. Maybe there's another reason why Libya are being attacked right now. So we see that these nations have been a great problem and have not been in compliance with the treaty. The United Nations Security Council is one of the principal organs of the United Nations and is charged with the maintenance of international peace and security. Its powers, outlined in the United Nations Charter, include the establishment of peacekeeping operations, the establishment of international sanctions, and the authorization of military action that needed to take place. Its powers are exercised through the United Nations Security Council resolutions. There are 15 members of the Security Council, consisting out of 5 veto-yielding permanent members and 10 selected or elected non-permanent members with a 2-year terms. This is very important to understand now. We see that the United Nations Security Council, which is a principal organ of the United Nations, is actually a council that is put in place for the maintenance of international peace and security. Therefore, they consider themselves as the peacekeepers of the world. And they also have a United Nations Security Council resolution that tells them what to do when the Security Council resolutions are broken. And they can also establish international sanctions against a country, or they can authorize any military action in the world. And we see that this organ actually consists out of 2 parts, the permanent members and the non-permanent members. The United Nations Security Council basically consists out of permanent members and proposed members. In order to find the proposed members, the United Nations Security Council resolution stipulates that 10 other members are elected by the General Assembly for 2-year terms starting on the 1st of January, with 5 replaced each year. The members are chosen by regional groups and confirmed by the United Nations General Assembly. Thus, the United Nations General Assembly will have the final say in who will be part as proposed members. From the African bloc, they will choose 3 members, the Latin American and the Caribbean. The Asian and Western European and other blocs will choose 2 members each, and the Eastern European bloc chooses 1 member. Also, one of these members is an Arab country, and alternatively from the Asian or African bloc. The current selected members with the regions that they were elected to represented, and their present representatives are the following. From the 1st of January 2009 until the 31st of December 2010, The 5 nations that was proposed members of the UN Security Council was Austria from the Western Europe and the other blocs, Japan from Asia, Mexico from Latin America and the Caribbean, Turkey from the Western Europe and other blocs, and Uganda from Africa. And from the 1st of January 2010 until the 31st of December 2011, that is the current proposed members, we have Bosnia and Herzegovina from Eastern Europe, Brazil from the Latin America and the Caribbean, Gabon from Africa, Lebanon from Asia, and Nigeria from Africa. The permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, as we have seen earlier, is China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And each of these members have a power to veto any substantive resolution that are tried to be brought in by any of the permanent members as well as the proposed members. It is very important to remember that each of the permanent members has a veto power. We will quickly just look at a history of how each of these permanent members have used their veto power in the past in order to understand what kind of power they exert in order to veto a certain resolution. Under Article 27 of the UN Charter, the Security Council decisions on all substantive matters require the affirmative votes of 9 members. A negative vote or a veto, also known as the rule of great power anonymity by a permanent member, prevents adoption of a proposal, even if it has received the required number of affirmative votes. Abstention is not regarded as a veto despite the wording of the Charter. Since the Security Council's inception, China has used its veto 6 times, France 18 times, Russia and the USSR 123 times, the United Kingdom 32 times, and the United States 82 times. The majority of Russian or Soviet vetoes were in the first 10 years of the Council's existence. Since 1984, China has vetoed 3 resolutions, France 3, Russia and USSR 4, and the United Kingdom 10, and the United States 43. We see that each of these permanent members have not been afraid to use their veto power in order to stop a certain resolution, even though there has been the required amount of votes in order to bring a certain resolution or to accept a certain bill. Also very important is those members who are the proposed permanent members who desire to be part of the United Nations Security Council. The G4 nations, namely Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan, has also been members who actually desire to be part of the United Nations Security Council. But most support one another's bids for permanent seats on the Security Council, though they are heavily opposed by various members nations of the UN. So we see that many of the UN members do not desire one of these nations to actually become a permanent member in the UN Security Council. We therefore see that there is a little bit of an animosity between the nations as to who truly are the powers of the world. And this animosity has been going on, and we will see now how Yeshua reveals how this animosity will also cause and bring about a great tear in the United Nations.